You know what that is. Okay, I know what that is. I think everybody knows what that is. People could say, oh, that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I say that it's U.S. meddling in the internal affairs of Ukraine, and that's why, because we're discussing why Russia is interested in this. Because Russia sees, my God, the United States is involved in a coup of a pro-Russian president next door to us. Okay, they're not shocked, by the way. They're not shocked by this. This is one of the main points that I find interesting. President Putin came out of the KGB. He understands how the CIA works. He understands this is reality for him. This is not a game. This is reality. So this is why he has a very clear understanding of how the U.S. operates. And this is where the concerns come in.
Yeah.
By the way, in 2008, the U.S. ambassador to Russia was William Burns, who is now the CIA director. William Burns wrote a famous memo back to the U.S. Secretary of State from Moscow, explaining that the Russian opposition to NATO enlargement to Ukraine was not about Putin. It was across the entire political class. It was all Russians in the political class. They don't want NATO on their 2,100 kilometer border with Ukraine. They don't want NATO there. Now, just to bring it to the present, in 2014, after the coup, there were two breakaway regions of Ukraine, the Russian ethnic regions of Lugansk and Donetsk. They broke away. The parts of the military took equipment and declared that these were now new people's republics separate from Ukraine. Russia did not claim the Donbass. Russia did not say, well, now we rebuild the Russian Empire. Russia said, we need to have peace and negotiate a settlement. And that led to the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements. And the Minsk II agreement in particular was endorsed by the UN Security Council, by the United States, by Germany, by France. It called for autonomy of the eastern regions of Ukraine. Autonomy. And I know what happened. I hope other people know what happened. The Ukrainians laughed at that. Oh, we're not going to give autonomy, even though they signed the treaty. And even though France and Germany were guarantors of the treaty called the Normandy process. And my Ukrainian counterparts at the time told me, we're never going to implement Minsk II. Don't even think about it. So this was another step in the collapse of any kind of trust whatsoever. That was 2015 to 2021. And Angela Merkel told Die Zeit a couple of years ago, oh yes, we didn't really see this as more than giving time to Ukraine to build up its military strength. So this was another trick of the West. This was not an agreement, which Russia thought this is a diplomatic agreement. This was yet another trick. Then Biden came in, and the Russians sought reassurances that the United States would stop putting missile placements near Russia. This is a matter of supreme concern to the Russian leadership. Missiles that are a few minutes away from Moscow. And the United States, in fact, not only walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, but Trump walked out of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty in 2019. So the whole edifice of nuclear control was collapsed. And the Russians were very worried. And they, in 2021, asked Biden, stop the NATO enlargement and stop the placement of missile systems near our border. It's deeply destabilizing and deeply threatening. Biden rejected both points of Russia, even though I believe that both points were completely right. And again, I hope I don't upset people that are listening, but Russia can also be right in what it's asking for diplomatically. It's not always wrong. And especially in this history of the US walking away from nuclear agreements, overthrowing governments, having CIA operations, cheating on diplomatic commitments, Russia can be right also to ask for stabilizing measures. The problem is that Biden is part of the neocon process. And if you listen to Victoria Nuland's tapes, her conversation with Piat in 2014, Biden and Sullivan are part of it. Back in 2014, they're part of the regime change operation. And they have been true to course from then until today. They believe in NATO expansion. They believe in US unipolarity. They believe in America's prerogatives to do what it wants with its nuclear weapon systems. They believe in the right of the United States to place its Aegis missiles wherever it wants, no matter how it's perceived as a threat to Russia. So in December 2021, President Putin put on the table a draft Russia-US security agreement. You can find it online once again. And it had many stipulations, some of which were absolutely right, in my opinion, such as no further NATO enlargement, and some of which were wrong, in my opinion. But it seemed to me that just demands for rolling back commitments that had been made, which I didn't think was viable, but I thought it was a negotiating tactic.
So the Russians, for example, suggested that the NATO infrastructure should go back to the year 97 when they actually decided to take us in.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. But I do agree with negotiations. I believe you discuss, because I think that the core of Russia's interests were two things. One was no further NATO enlargement, and second was no further placement of American missile systems in Russia's neighborhood, other than through agreed treaty arrangements with Russia. Both of those, I think, are completely valid from Russia's point of view. In fact, valid from America's point of view, because I just think that they are stabilizing. And so there's a very funny idea in the Western leadership right now, which is that Russia puts forward a proposal, and then there are parts of the proposal that the United States doesn't like, and then the proposal is attacked and damned because of those parts, but no counterproposal is made. Only we cannot negotiate with that evil demon. This is a kind of game. If you are the unipolar power, you don't need to negotiate after all. And that's the US position.
They would tell you they can't negotiate because Ukraine had the right to apply for NATO membership, as like every country has the right to apply for membership of whatever organization.
Yes, and the United States has the right to say no, because this is a US-led military organization.
Actually,
this is a ridiculous argument. This is completely fatuous argument. And if I, as an American voter, I absolutely object to NATO being in Ukraine. I think it's dangerous for Ukraine. I think it's dangerous for the United States. I think it's dangerous for Russia. I think it's dangerous for the world. Ukraine can apply.
From the Czech point of view, which is...
Yeah, but before we get to the Czech point of view, let me just finish from the Russian point of view. So the United States refused to negotiate. This is important to understand. You may give reasons, but from the Russian point of view, they put forward proposals repeatedly that the West refused to negotiate. And then we use the line, oh, we can't negotiate with them. You know, we need to look at ourselves too. It's very hard because we're good and they're evil. So we think. But we need to look at ourselves too. I personally call it the Jesus Christ foreign policy, because Jesus said, why do you point to the mote in the eye of the other person when you have the beam in your own eye? And what he meant was, don't only point the finger at others, try to understand your own position too. And this, I think, is wise advice. So we refused to negotiate. I called the White House to urge them to negotiate because I thought this was good for Ukraine. It would avoid a war. I thought it was good for the United States. I thought it was good for Russia. That's not contradictory. We're not in a zero-sum world. We're in a world trying to avoid war and destruction. But they refused to negotiate. Then
You are talking about December 21?
That's correct. Then in January 2022, the United States, through Secretary Blinken, told Russia through Foreign Minister Lavrov that the United States reserved the right to put missile systems in Ukraine.
Did they?
Yes. Please read the recent analysis of Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst, very senior, who has described this meeting recently.
I didn't know.
That was January 2022. Russia launched its escalation, so-called special military operation, on February 24th, 2022. And within a few days, Zelensky said, well, we can be neutral. We could be neutral. And on that basis, papers were exchanged between Ukraine and Russia to settle the war. And the government of Turkey in Ankara, in the foreign ministry, acted as mediators. And I flew to Ankara to get a detailed briefing by the lead mediators. And so I learned all of the details of what happened. What happened was that the two sides were making dramatic progress. They were on the verge of signing an agreement. And then one day, Ukraine walked away and said, we don't negotiate anymore. That's all. Now, we do know that the US told them to walk away. We know that the UK told them to walk away. We know that Boris Johnson said we must defeat Russia to protect Western hegemony. We know that Boris Johnson told Ukraine, we will never accept neutrality, only NATO membership. You're on the Western side, and the West must win this war to protect Western hegemony. Boris Johnson has said this explicitly.
Did he explicitly say that the UK won't accept Ukraine's neutrality?
Yes, he told them.
I actually only know quotes from his visit to Kiev back then, when he said, we will not guarantee.
Yes, we will not guarantee. That's correct.
Russia.
That's correct. We will not guarantee you.
Which is slightly different from saying that.
Yes, it is slightly different. The purpose was fight on, as he has explained. We have your back. Don't negotiate. Don't make peace. Well, this is how it works. We don't want peace. We want to defeat Russia. That is explicit. Everybody says it on the Western side. I don't even know what it means, other than we all die in the end in nuclear war. I don't know what they mean. They tell me, oh, don't worry about it. Russia will give in. Thank you very much. That's nice. Is that, you're sure of that? That's 100%? Oh, how do you know? your God, or is it 99%? So, yeah, the world ends in nuclear annihilation because 1% chance, and that's because Ukraine must be part of NATO, that This is how we act, like children, like it's a board game. We had the chance for negotiations repeatedly. Russia didn't make territorial demands on Ukraine before 2014, before the overthrow of Yanukovych.
So
No
you
territorial demands.
So you obviously think that the casus belli, like the main reason for Russia to go to war, was the prospect of NATO membership of Ukraine.
The prospect of NATO membership, the prospect of U.S. weapon systems, and the prospect of U.S. actions to weaken or dismember Russia. All of that.
So
this is the context of this war is U.S.-Russia relations. That's the context of this war. It is not between Ukraine and Russia. It is between the United States and Russia.
Widely used argument here in the Czech Republic is that who are we to tell the Ukrainians we won't allow you to join the NATO because we were in the same position of the beggars who wanted to get in. So we can't tell them now, fuck off.
I'm not telling Ukraine to fuck off. I'm telling them to save themselves. I'm telling them to save themselves. I was telling them for years, choose neutrality to stay safe. Join the European Union, absolutely. But choose military neutrality. Don't let the United States use you as a forward base against Russia. Don't become the threat to Russia's core security because the U.S. is pushing you into the front line. I'm not telling Ukraine to fuck off. I'm telling Ukraine to stay safe. And they're not safe. They've lost around 500,000 deaths so far. They are losing on the battlefield. We're escalating towards nuclear war. I'm telling them to stay safe. I would say, by the way, the same advice to Mexico. Please, my friends in Mexico, don't invite Russia or China to have military bases and missile systems on the Rio Grande River border with the United States. Please don't do that. That's not good for Mexico. That's what I would tell them.
What would happen if they didn't listen to your advice?
Well, when Cuba did this in 1962, we almost had nuclear war. It was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States did not say, oh, we agree with the people of the Czech Republic that Cuba has the right to choose its own military partners. The United States did not say that. The United States did not say, well, we know that Russia has an open door policy for the Warsaw Pact and Cuba wants to be part of it. That's their business. It's not our business. No, the United States said, we will go to war, including nuclear war, unless Russia retreats. That's what, actually, to be clear, unless the Soviet Union retreats. Yeah. This is an important distinction, by the way. But my point is, no, have some sense and some prudence. And this is not against Ukraine at all. I have been giving the best advice to Ukraine how to survive and how to stay safe. If you are next door to Russia, you do not invite the United States to come in and put its military and its missile systems in your country. You don't. And if you're really a friend of Ukraine in the Czech Republic, you don't tell them fight on. That's not advice. You say, let's make peace so that Ukrainians can live in peace. And you don't round up Ukrainian refugees and force them to the front lines to their death, which I hope Europe won't do, but which the Ukrainians are now asking for.
So the Czech government explicitly said that they won't do that.
Good, thank you. Yeah. But other countries seem ready to do it, and I hope that Europe has enough common sense and ethics and morality not to do it, but the Ukrainians are asking for it.
There is one more point I want to make is that I guess or I imagine that very many of our listeners will be a little bit disturbed by what you have been saying until now. So they will not agree with you because they will think that we Czechs with our unique experience of Munich 38 and then the Soviet invasion 68 are actually in a better position than the rest of the world to understand what the Russians are trying to do. Would you think that that this reference to Munich and 68 invasion is being overused in the recent history or in the geopolitical conflicts?
Look, people should understand first that in 1938, Stalin reached out to Churchill and to the French leadership, said, let's make an alliance together against Hitler. And
Churchill actually wasn't in power yet back then.
I'm sorry, to Chamberlain, excuse
Chamberlain,
me.
yeah.
I apologize. Reached out to Britain and to France, I should say. Let's make an alliance against Hitler. And the Western countries refused. This is the real tragedy. And this is the first point. The idea, second, Chamberlain obviously was extremely naive. No one is asking for naivete. I am asking for serious, non-naive negotiations. The idea that because Chamberlain was naive in 1938, that you never negotiate, it would be a mistake. What I am asking for is to understand the situation, and my own proposal is Ukraine's neutrality. That's my proposal. And I believe that it is in Ukraine's interest. I believe that it is in America's interest. I believe it is in the Czech Republic and Europe's interest. I believe that it is in Russia's interest. I see no valid grounds for the United States putting its advanced systems, its military, its alliance right up against Russia's borders. And I see no prospect that Russia is going to accept that peacefully. And I see no prospect that we are going to defeat Russia to get that done without devastation. So for these reasons, I am looking personally for a pragmatic approach. And the pragmatic approach is one that would protect Ukraine and that would make peace. And that needs to come not on the battlefield, because on the battlefield, Ukraine is very likely to lose a conventional war because it's running out of people who are dying and wounded, and because Russia will escalate to a nuclear war if it is losing a conventional war. Or it might. Maybe it's 50-50. Maybe it's 25-75. I'm not ready to gamble the world on the question of NATO enlargement to Ukraine. And while Ukraine can ask, I can say, as an American citizen, I hope my government rejects such a unwise request and explains reality to Ukraine.
Do you think
That is...
do you think this August 68 comparison, does it work, or do we look at the
I don't know what the comparison is. It has nothing to do with the other. I don't see any relevance or comparison to 1968.
The comparison being made here very often is that the Russians are always on the march to the west.
Well, like I said, if you want to call the Germans Nazis, and if you want to call the British endless imperialists, you can use whatever label you want. You can make simple-minded generalizations across decades of history any way you want, but it's meaningless. Countries have their history and we have our present, and we are not condemned by our past. And Russia in 1992 was not out for war with the West or with Europe. I was there. I don't care what anyone tells me. I spoke with Boris Yeltsin. I watched the situation. I knew Mikhail Gorbachev. They were not out for conquest or war. They were for peace. And we're fools if we just say, well, that place is evil and we're good, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
I know my own country, and I've tried to explain my own country to you. And my own country has its very dark history and dark sides too. It doesn't mean that the United States is doomed to be evil. It means that we all should watch ourselves and behave properly and address the crisis that we have and find a solution to this crisis.
My last question. In case Donald Trump wins the election, do you think will the danger of the big war with Russia disappear?
I think the United States will be unstable no matter what happens in the coming years. Our political system is not working. We have two candidates who are completely inadequate for the presidency. Biden makes Brezhnev look young. Biden cannot function as president anymore. Trump is unstable. The United States is broken politically because it's a corrupted system. We're deeply divided. There's no agreement on anything. It's big money changing hands, $15 billion in this election cycle. So Europeans should understand, although I know they love America, and I can imagine in the listeners also not being able to make sense of what I'm saying or saying, what a strange idea. The United States is not in a stable place right now. Europe should take care of itself. It should be prudent. It should not want more war. It should not expect the United States to save them. It should try to find calm on the continent. And it can do so. It can do so by recognizing the security concerns on all sides. Enough missile placements, enough advances of military bases everywhere, enough increased military budgets, enough of this. We need peace and calm. And the United States is not going to be a stable hand no matter what happens in November. It will not be. So Europe has to get its act together, not be so divided, but stop the hate mongering and the warmongering against Russia, because Russia's not going away. We need to find a way to have a modus vivendi that is peaceful, and historical analogies are to be used with great care, because it's easy to generalize. Don't generalize. Don't overgeneralize. Try to understand the circumstances and find solutions for our generation.